This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Utilize my link squarespace.com/juliacudney for 10% off of your first purchase of a domain. The year is 2014. Russia hosts the Winter Olympics in February. In March, Ellen hosts the Oscars, and by May, Kim Ye has tied the knot. They'll last, I'm sure. August, however, is the month at issue because in it, Iggy Azalea releases the music video for her second biggest hit, featuring Rita Ora, Black Widow. It pays homage to Kill Bill, similarly to how Fancy's video paid homage to Clueless. The song itself reminds 16-year-old Julia of her most hated Katy Perry song, Dark Horse, which makes sense considering it was originally composed by her for Prism. The more you know. Anyway, I'm kidding with all of this. We've gathered here today to discuss Black Widow, the movie. Obviously. The year is 2016. August sees the Summer Olympics held in Rio. April sees Beyonce drop Lemonade. And following the release of Captain America Civil War in May, the release of Natasha Romanoff's first solo MCU installment, which fittingly takes place right where Civil War left off. The year is 2021. And Black Widow is finally here. Do you think if it were set in 2014 as opposed to 16, Iggy's Black Widow would have won out over Cheap Thrills? Speaking of, I didn't avoid spoiling this one for myself, so I did stumble upon some critiques of it before I saw it. Like, Cheap Thrills plays very awkwardly to help establish that the movie takes place in 2016. The thing is, as my own two eyes witnessed the scene in question, I found that I disagreed. Not that the song was meant to reaffirm the timeline, but that its inclusion was very awkward. What I find awkward are needle drops that don't get the year right. See recently late 90s stuff in Fear Street Part 1 1994. Actually, one of my least favorite licensed song usages in film history was the MCU's doing, Just a Girl in Captain Marvel. Now, that scene was very awkward, the way it violently distracted me from paying attention because I had to ponder performative feminism. Discover what makes a hurro. Buy hurros at your local grocer. Look, whatever. My stance is that Cheap Thrills plays momentarily, ambiently, diegetically, quietly through Natasha's car radio to drive home how unexpectedly she's attacked. Weird connection, but in my opinion, it's accomplishing what Vampire Academy tried to do. That opening actually does give you a pretty good idea of how quick this movie will just switch tones on you. Live fast, die young, bad girls do it well, car crash. I suppose I do find MIA's appearance in Vampire Academy awkward enough, though, that I must understand why at least 269 Twitter users find Sia's admittedly similar appearance in Black Widow awkward. I don't bring this disagreement up because it's super important to me that nobody questions Cheap Thrills usage in Black Widow, but because it exemplifies how I'm experiencing the discourse. I'm seeing all of these critiques and my reactions vary from, I'm not sure about that, to, wrong. What are you talking about? Did we watch the same movie? I guess I can't call this video a defense of Black Widow because it hasn't exactly been critically panned, but on YouTube and Twitter, I feel rather unsupported in my belief that it slots easily into the MCU's top 5. Thus, I must break my sacred vow never to speak of Marvel, DC, or Star Wars on behalf of all those who agree with me. Yes, in part because I think it's important more women have their say about this one specifically. If it's not a defense, let's call it an endorsement.
That wasn't real. Who cares?
Don't say that. Please don't say that. It was real. It was real to me.
It must be said that I don't think it's perfect. After all, I only gave it 4 out of 5 stars, and I'm not particularly stingy. If I can confidently say I love and adore a movie, no matter its objective quality, 5 stars. I don't worship Black Widow unconditionally. I just think she's swell. I'd like to hang out with her sometime, and the issues I do take with her are not hers alone to bear. You see, I don't love any MCU installment 5 stars worth, hence one reason why I never wanted to talk about it, despite having seen every movie. If you want to know what I think Black Widow's worst scene is, it's the one that breaks all of the momentum built by those heartbreaking first 16 minutes. I was feeling for these girls, invested in a title sequence implying their trauma, before I was forced to find my footing in this relentless continuity. Like, oh look, it's that vaguely familiar guy from What I Don't Remember after Natasha for reasons forgotten. I mean, I watched Civil War once, 5 years ago, and I never revisited it because I'm not a super mega nerd. I'm kidding. But if you are one, know that these hands have never touched a comic book. I have read some Squirrel Girl digitally, but I didn't even enjoy the Sunday Funnies growing up. And my favorite action movie is Speed, which according to my dad is a peculiar choice. It shouldn't be. That movie rocks. Action just isn't my genre, and on account of that, feel free to take with a grain of salt that I find some of Black Widow's combat incredibly well choreographed. My benchmark for saying so is that as someone who struggles paying attention to fight scenes, I paid close attention to Natasha's first encounters with Yelena and Taskmaster. The sound design on the bridge was particularly enthralling. And can I mention the thematic implications of an antagonist being able to mimic the combative techniques of their protagonist, who's a widow, all of whom fight identically because of their lack of free will and training? You wouldn't get it. Despite all of this, one criticism I've seen that I actually do agree with is that its third act is its weakest act because it's so by the books in terms of action. For emphasis on that point of view, I do like Captain Midnight's video on the subject. I agree with him for the most part, and I appreciate his acknowledgement that uniquely compelling climactic battles aren't usually Marvel's strong suit, and Black Widow isn't a special case in that regard. I suppose where I differ is in believing the rest of the movie built up enough goodwill to offset the disappointment, and I don't think I'm as bothered by the third act as many are anyway due to my CGI blindness. I tweeted about this the other day, and it was in reference to Black Widow. Everybody was making fun of its bad CGI, and I thought it looked fine. I do not see what you see, and I can't pretend to be bothered by what is invisible to me. Special effects have to be next level horrendous for me to take notice. I'm looking at you, Teen Wolf. On that note, speaking of action set pieces in particular, why am I mostly hearing about the supposedly poorly done finale? Because I could have sworn there was like an hour and a half of movie outside of that. Did you feel nothing watching a little girl pilot a plane because her surrogate mother was shot at the wheel lever? You and I both know it was magical watching Scarlett Johansson glide above the rubble like Nicole Kidman in Moulin Rouge, an intentional reference, by the way.
One of my favorite moments in the film is when she is underneath the helicopter and she's flying through the snow. And I was really inspired by Nicole Kidman in Moulin Rouge because she's flying across all these men and there's this kind of massive men underneath her and she's just above, you know, this angel. It was so much fun, you know, because we could create these moments of beauty that I hope will resonate with young women.
There you have it, folks. This one's for the girls. Men aren't allowed to hate this movie. I shouldn't say that. They'll take me seriously. Let me amend my statement. Men aren't allowed to hate this movie or this video. In all seriousness, I do think some of Black Widow's virtues are more apparent to those of us with long hair, for instance. I never realized how annoying I found Women in Action's perfect blowouts before seeing this alternative. The hairstyling department just absolutely killed it with the Russian braids. But that's a minute detail. More importantly, I think many women interpret Black Widow's themes not more accurately, but differently than others. Let's talk about Taskmaster. Apparently, he's called Tony Masters in the comics, and he has an entire backstory, personality, and belief system of his own. People are attached to him, people are familiar with him, and as much as my liking of Black Widow makes me want to respond to those who take issue with his gender-swapped mute adaptation coldly, I've come to agree that if the only two traits these two characters share are a costume and a pseudonym, They should have just designed a new costume and picked a new pseudonym. Why adapt the likeness of an established character if you don't intend to draw anything from them but a power? I can't, however, agree that independent of what I've heard called corruption of source material, Antonia Dreykov is a bad villain, or a villain at all. Meet me where I'm at here, okay? This version of Taskmaster is the only one I've ever known, and without any preconceived notion of what they should be, it's impossible to interpret her as a villain. I keep hearing what a bad, terrible villain she is, and this is the critique that's driving me the most batty, because I think to interpret her as a villain as opposed to a victim is to be ignorant of what she represents in this story. For a more substantial look at the point of view I'm arguing against here, let's reference the Closer Looks video mainly about the wasted potential of Taskmaster. I'll disclaim I'm subscribed to this channel, I watch this channel, hence why I saw this video, with which I happen to disagree vehemently, which is fine. I'm not an avid consumer of opinion-based content because I expect to agree with everyone all the time. But I do have words. I encourage you to watch his video and ensure I'm not misrepresenting anything here, but my main takeaway is that he thinks Black Widow would have been Marvel at its best if Antonia basically had agency. He explains that because Natasha is motivated by a want for redemption, the impact of her facing off against someone she's wronged is wasted on a villain who can't talk through that theme with her.
Yes, the film technically had that dynamic there, but the terrible shame is how the film puts absolutely zero energy into exploring it, into Taskmaster and Black Widow actually speaking to each other, having some kind of debate, not literally debating, obviously, but more so the same kind of debate that the Batman and Joker had throughout The Dark Knight. Black Widow entirely lacks the juicy, nuanced conflict that could and should have been going on between the hero and the villain, as Taskmaster is bitter and rightfully resentful because, Black Widow crippled her and ruined her life when she was a child, and Black Widow begging for forgiveness, crushed by guilt as she tries to fight the embodiment of her core character wound. But of course, Taskmaster can't do any of that, because she is a literal blank slate who doesn't even have one line of dialogue.
She does have one line of dialogue, actually, but that doesn't necessarily disprove his point.
Is he gone?
He's gone.
From where he's sitting, because of their lack of substantial communication, Black Widow has nothing more profound to say about redemption than,
if you've done true evil in the past, don't worry about feeling guilty or coming to terms with it, because in order to find redemption, all you have to do is track down the person you wronged and spray some red gunk in their face.
Let's chat about subtext.
Why can I never say no to her? What's that smell?
Subtext by Calvin Klein.
If you're unaware, though I imagine you are aware, subtext refers to the act of art implying meaning where it isn't implicitly stated. While I know that he calls it red gunk for a punchline, I'd like to make it clear that the thematic importance of this red dust cannot be overstated. We're introduced to it about 20 minutes into the film, when what it symbolizes is shown instead of told to us. We see it reunite rightful fan favorite Yelena's personhood with her body. Widows, apparently, don't have free will.
Shut up. The point is, I've never had control over my own life before, and now I do. I want to do things.
I like your vest.
God, I knew it. I knew you did. It's so cool, right?
And yes, their oppression can easily be read as representing patriarchal oppression in the real world. Allegorically, it's hard not to read the Red Room's methods of capture as commentary on sex trafficking and other such things, the way they target the least protected, most vulnerable types of girls. And reproductive rights are addressed head-on, even as a late addition to the script.
Is it your time of the month?
I don't get my period, dipshit. I don't have a uterus.
Or ovaries.
Yeah, that's what happens when the Red Room gives you an involuntary hysterectomy.
We almost see the red gunk in action again about 40 minutes in, when Yelena intends to free a fellow widow with it before she's forced to self-terminate. This moment is so important as far as my interpretation of Black Widow's themes is concerned, because here we see Natasha and Yelena attempt to save a fellow widow and grieve her when they can't. Here, their motivation to take down Dreykov is established, liberating their sisters.
You believe me now? How many others? Enough.
It's no coincidence that 10 minutes later is when they embark on their mission. You see, the Closer Looks video asserts something else I'd like to address, that Natasha wants to kill Dreykov out of revenge.
Like, making it worse, the only motivation Natasha's had that's driven the plot is a revenge motivation to kill the villain Dreykov. And in the end, Natasha never actually gets to kill Dreykov. Instead, her sister does, while Black Widow watches from a distance, passive as can be while it happens. Revenge has been Natasha's main motivation throughout the film, and the resolution to this is a total damp squib, as he's indirectly killed by an explosion that she didn't cause. As villain deaths go, Dreykov's was the opposite of satisfying, and if there were to ever be any kind of story where you had to give a satisfying villain death, it would have to be in a revenge movie.
I find there to be no textual evidence to support that claim, except that she would have cause for wanting revenge if she did, which she never implies she does. What we have in the text are scenes upon scenes laying bare how tragic it is that widows' lives are stolen.
Why does a mouse born in a cage run on that little wheel? Do you know I was cycled through the Red Room 4 times before you were even born? Those was all I know. I was never given a choice.
You're not a mouse, Melina. You were just born in a cage, but that's not your fault.
What we have is evidence to support the claim that not a single widow is a villain, because none but Natasha, to be fair, are responsible for their actions. Our protagonists never strive to defeat them, only to free them. And when they are freed, none of the actions they took under the influence, we'll say, are held against them. Forgiveness is a given. To me, this is much more a story about solidarity and family than it is redemption, but regardless, I do think it has something profound to say about redemption. More profound, anyway, than that spraying red gunk is the answer, because I hope by now I've convinced you the red gunk symbolizes freedom. The reveal that Taskmaster is Dreykov's daughter immediately recontextualizes her role in the story. I suppose up until she's freed, we can call her an antagonist because she's technically working against the interests of our protagonists, but the notion of her being a villain dies with the notion of her being Tony. From this point forward, she's no more villainous than every other widow we've encountered, which is the significance of her. When Natasha realizes that she didn't just kill a little girl, but doomed her to experience a worse version of the same trauma she herself experienced, that's when saving her, freeing her consciousness, becomes unnegotiable.
I'm gonna open the door. You're gonna come after me. It's okay. It's okay.
I know you're still in there. And I'm not gonna leave you. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's honestly hard for me to understand how people watch this and don't see a movie putting energy into exploring what it is to grapple with evil you've done. Yes, we see Natasha spray red gunk into Antonia's face, and we don't see them debate their moral philosophies, but what I gather from that is that Black Widow's opinion on redemption is that your personal feelings of regret and your words of apology are not as important as the tangible action you can take to right your wrongs. I think this theme is also present when it comes to Natasha and Yelena's parents. I keep hearing about how unfair it is how quickly they're forgiven for their evil acts, and I am more sympathetic towards that opinion because they do have done evil, but I'm also convinced their pseudo-redemptions help my point. We don't see this family reach peace by having effective heart-to-hearts. Quite the opposite, actually. We see Alexei try desperately to communicate with these girls, but it's just not working. The first moment of real understanding we see between him and Yelena comes about through an action, not words.
The day, the music died.
He's never successful in reciting his apologetic monologue because he's busy being interrupted by the actions he's taking to right his wrongs. Natasha and Yelena's parents find peace with them because they helped dismantle the system of oppression they created, which was essentially the best they could do at that point. This movie suggests that apologies are less effective than reparations if you want redemption. I had more to say originally about bioluminescence, sisterhood, the American dream, the nuclear family, adoption as trauma, but I feel rather satisfied with what I've said already. This video is sponsored by Squarespace, and while you may know it's an easy-to-use website designer, you may not know the extent of its capabilities. Squarespace supports community building by allowing for threaded comments and replies. For a more exclusive user experience, with Squarespace, content can be locked behind a paywall for members only. If you have a product to push, try Squarespace extensions, with which inventory can be managed and commodities can be promoted. All things considered, what's stopping you from utilizing my link, squarespace.com/juliaccudney, to redeem your free trial and receive 10% off of your first purchase of a domain.